They want your corpse. That's the first thought as you rise from scented sheets and slip into the linen that smells of cedar and defiance. You are 17. You are queen. You are prey. You do not get to grieve your father. You do not get to mourn the brother who will one day poison your wine. The palace whispers in Greek, prays in Egyptian, and plots in silence. The only thing more dangerous than being Pharaoh is being Pharaoh alone. You enter the hall. 1,000 hands carve your path, braiding, painting, powdering you into myth. Your eyelids are brushed with crushed beetle shells. Your lips taste of lotus paste and strategy. You don't flinch when they pierce your ears again. Your last set of earrings were torn out in last week's riot. Outside, Alexandria seethes. A famine boils beneath the perfume of the flower market. The temples grow quiet. Your people still worship you, but now they do it nervously. And Rome? Rome watches everything. You have summoned them. Julius Caesar's ships anchor at your harbour. You've sent no envoy, no procession, no husband-king beside you. Only a rug. You're going to roll yourself into it like a parcel and have them carry you to him. It's a joke, a riddle, a war tactic. But before that, you must survive this day. You walk out to the palace terrace, ready to meet the crowds, to show the city that their queen is unbroken, divine, untouchable. But something's wrong. There are no cheers, no chants, only stillness. The guards are missing, your general gone, and across the marble courtyard, beneath the temple columns, is a smear of blood being cleaned too quickly. One of your servants, the one who knew too much, is gone, vanished, or silenced. You were supposed to make your move tonight. Someone else just made theirs first. Cleopatra VII was not born in Egypt. Not really. She was born in a palace layered with languages, rivalries, and gods that no longer listened. Her family, the Ptolemies, ruled Egypt like foreigners squatting on stolen gold. They were Macedonian Greeks who hadn't bothered to speak Egyptian in 3 centuries. They married their siblings, named every daughter Cleopatra, every son Ptolemy, and killed each other over temple taxes and throne cushions. By the time Cleopatra arrived, the bloodline was a ghost ship. Her father, Ptolemy XII, nicknamed Orleats, the flute player, ruled with bribes and Roman loans. He danced for senators and paid for favor in silver, not loyalty. When the people chased him out, Cleopatra went with him. She watched exile from Rome's gutters. She saw what Egyptian queens were worth as much as their bribe money held. But Cleopatra returned smarter, harder, and more fluent. While her siblings giggled over poetry, she studied. She learned rhetoric, philosophy, medicine. Most shockingly, she learned to speak Egyptian, a language even her own father never bothered to master. In doing so, she became not just a ruler, but a symbol, a living Isis, in a city that had begun to forget her face. No marble bust could capture what she knew. That power wasn't a sword, it was a mirror. She could reflect anything her people needed to see. A goddess, a mother, a war bride, a ghost. But behind every carefully chosen phrase was a girl who had already watched the Nile rise and fall with treachery. She'd been groomed to smile while dying. She didn't cry when her father died. She didn't flinch when her first co-ruler tried to erase her name from the palace decrees. What did that teach her? That no god would save her, that no brother could be trusted, and that Rome wasn't coming to help. Rome was coming to feed. When Cleopatra took the throne, it came with a brother attached. Ptolemy XIII was 10. She was 18. The marriage was ceremonial, the alliance necessary. But the tension, that was real, and it crackled beneath the marble columns like a slow fuse. Their reign began with shared titles, dual portraits, joint proclamations. But behind the papyrus, the knives were already out. Courtiers whispered into her brother's ear, Eunuchs manipulated official seals. Cleopatra's name was pushed lower on the scrolls, her image cropped from the coins. Within 2 years, she was gone exiled from Alexandria, cast out like a bad omen. She fled east with a few loyal soldiers, watching as her brother's advisors scrawled new laws in her absence. Egypt still had a queen. She just wasn't allowed in her own capital. But Cleopatra was not the type to sulk in the desert. She raised her own army. She bided her time. And when Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, dripping with Roman arrogance and fresh off Pompey's corpse, she knew her opening had come. The legend says she arrived, rolled in a rug, smuggled into Caesar's chambers like a seductive Trojan horse. But the truth is more chilling. Cleopatra wasn't offering her body. She was offering Egypt. Her brother balked. War erupted. What followed was chaos in silk robes, fire in the Great Library, riots in the streets, Egyptian soldiers dying beside Roman legionaries. In the end, Caesar won. Cleopatra won more. Her brother drowned in the Nile, fleeing a battle he'd already lost. His golden armor dragged him down faster than any blade. Some say he was pushed. Cleopatra never corrected the rumor. She emerged triumphant, not as a pawn but as Pharaoh. She married another brother, because tradition demanded it. But she ruled alone, because she demanded it. The Game of Thrones in Egypt wasn't about succession, it was about survival. And Cleopatra had learned early that in a family of kings, the smartest queen never plays fair. Julius Caesar did not come to Egypt for Cleopatra. He came for debts, for grain, for Pompey, his rival turned corpse, whose decapitated head was shoved into Caesar's hands as a grotesque welcome gift by Ptolemy's ministers. Caesar recoiled. Egypt had misunderstood Rome. Cleopatra, however, did not. She knew Caesar better than he knew himself. She understood men who believed they were gods. She had grown up among them, so she didn't send flowers. She didn't send treaties. She sent herself, smuggled into the palace, hidden in linens, not as a damsel, but as a weapon. She entered Caesar's chambers, unarmed, painted, composed. The carpet tale became legend. But what happened next was diplomacy disguised as seduction. Cleopatra offered him more than alliance. She offered spectacle. She took him down the Nile in a floating palace draped in gold. Musicians played. Servants fanned them. She dressed as Isis. He watched like a boy, reading mythology in the flesh. Egypt became a stage. Cleopatra, its star. Caesar, her captive audience. But it wasn't just pageantry. She spoke with precision. She offered solutions. She framed their union not as romance, but as restoration of Egypt's stability, of Rome's interests. She presented herself not as a woman, but as a partner in empire. And yet, the Romans would never see her that way. To them, she was witchcraft in human form. They couldn't understand a woman who didn't flinch before generals. So they explained her away with perfume and poison and beauty spells. Cleopatra gave Caesar a son Caesarion. The name said everything. He would be king, Roman by blood, Egyptian by right. It was a challenge wrapped in a cradle. When Caesar returned to Rome, Cleopatra followed not as a guest, but as a warning. She lived in his villa outside the city, a foreign queen with a royal child, and a presence too regal to ignore. The Senate fumed, the people gawked, and behind it all, Cleopatra watched, patient, unbowed. But even she couldn't predict what would happen next. Not the knives, not the ides, not the blood on the marble, and certainly not what his death would make of her. Cleopatra's return to Egypt was quiet, no trumpets, no parades, just whispers. In Rome, she'd walked among senators who feared her smile more than Caesar's sword. She'd worn gold in a city of iron. She'd fed the streets with scandal, and the poets with metaphors. Now, back in Alexandria, She was no longer merely queen. She was legend, but legends are rarely kind. To her people, Cleopatra became something divine. She wasn't just Pharaoh, she was Isis reborn. Temples carved her image with celestial halos. Priests performed rituals in her name. She stood at the head of processions not as a ruler, but as the embodiment of a goddess. To the Romans, she was something else entirely. A sorceress, a manipulator, the foreign woman who turned Caesar against the Republic. The problem wasn't just her gender, it was her control. She made choices men didn't expect from queens. She acted without permission. She ruled without apology. Ancient writers, mostly Roman and male, wrote about her not with clarity, but with suspicion. They mentioned her intelligence in passing. They lingered on her perfume. Her voice was said to be like music. Her presence, irresistible. What they couldn't control, they romanticized. Even now, scholars debate her face. Coins show her with a strong nose, sharp jaw, hollow cheeks. Some say it was propaganda that she was more beautiful than the metal suggests. Others say beauty was never the point. Cleopatra's power didn't lie in her looks. It lay in her presence, in the way she stepped into a room and made men recalculate their ambitions. She wasn't trying to be Rome's Venus. She was trying to be Egypt's last line of defense. But as rumors swirled and her court thickened with Roman tensions, Cleopatra began to understand what she was truly becoming. A myth, one she couldn't fully control. And across the sea, another man with Roman armor and theatrical ambition was rising, one who would come to see Cleopatra not as a queen, but as a question that needed erasing. His name? Marcus Antonius. Mark Antony was no Caesar, and Cleopatra knew it. He was louder, messier, less disciplined, but also more desperate. When he summoned her to Tarsus in 41 BCE, it wasn't love at first sight. It was theatre, political foreplay wrapped in incense and silver. Cleopatra didn't arrive as a supplicant. She arrived as a goddess. Her barge floated upriver with purple sails and gold oars. Musicians played. Servants fanned her. She reclined beneath a canopy dressed as Aphrodite. The Greek version of Isis, the divine face Rome couldn't stop staring at. Antony, famously theatrical himself, was stunned. But Cleopatra didn't need his admiration. She needed his army. In return, he needed her wealth. Rome was fractured. Civil war loomed. And Cleopatra offered something no Roman matron could. A throne, a legacy, and a stage big enough for both of them. Their affair began with banquets. It ended with battle plans. Together, they ruled the Eastern Mediterranean like living gods. They founded the so-called donations of Alexandria, dividing lands and titles among their children. They played empire in the open, a dangerous game in the shadow of Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Antony's political rival. The Roman Senate gasped. Cleopatra was crowned Queen of Kings. Caesarion was declared Caesar's rightful heir. Octavian sharpened his propaganda. To Rome, it wasn't just Antony who'd gone rogue. It was Cleopatra, the foreign queen with too much influence, too many ships, and too many sons with Roman blood. Still, the lovers celebrated. They staged mock triumphs. Dressed as Dionysus and Isis, dined on silver plates and named cities after their children. But beneath the marble and music, the war drums grew louder. Cleopatra may have believed they were building a second Rome, one where Egypt and empire could merge. But in truth, they were building a funeral pyre, and the spark would come from the sea. It was supposed to be a demonstration of dominance. The Battle of Actium, the 2nd of September, 31 BCE, wasn't meant to decide history. It was meant to remind the world who held the better gods, ships, and banners. Antony and Cleopatra commanded hundreds of warships. Octavian's fleet was smaller, less experienced. The Nile alliance should have crushed him. Instead, the sea betrayed them. The wind turned against Egypt. Disease spread in Antony's camp. Cleopatra's supply lines faltered. And Octavian, young, calculating, patient, let them rot under the sun before striking. On the day of battle, Cleopatra positioned her fleet near the rear. Not cowardice strategy. She knew what Antony couldn't admit. This wasn't a war of valor. It was a war of survival. But Antony, proud, theatrical Antony, fought like a man auditioning for immortality. His ships engaged too early. His men panicked. His command chain shattered. And then, Cleopatra moved. Her fleet broke formation and fled sails raised, away from the chaos. Historians still debate why. Was it betrayal? Prearranged escape? A desperate attempt to save her remaining forces? No one agrees. Antony saw her sails vanish through the smoke. He abandoned the fight. He followed. Some say he left mid-command. Others claim he paused, stunned before turning his flagship toward her retreat. Either way, his departure sealed their fate. The rest of their fleet collapsed, surrendered, burned. Rome didn't just win a battle. It watched its enemies flee. The propaganda wrote itself. Cleopatra, the manipulative seductress, had led Antony astray, the noble general undone by a foreign queen. The story sold well in marble and ink. But the truth was simpler. Cleopatra knew Egypt would not survive another Roman leash. She gambled everything on one naval roll of the dice, and lost. Now, with her fleet reduced to kindling and her lover disgraced, she returned to Alexandria not as a goddess, but as a woman being hunted. The sea had spoken. Rome was coming, and this time they would not leave her kingdom breathing. The end began in whispers, not war cries. Cleopatra returned to Alexandria behind shuttered windows. Her temples were silent. Her ships were ash. Antony, shamed and fractured, unraveled by the hour. Rome's armies closed in. The once golden lovers now looked like ghosts in marble halls. Antony tried to rally. He offered duels, sent envoys. Octavian ignored him. Then came the rumor. Cleopatra was dead. Antony believed it. And with Rome at his gates and shame in his throat, he fell on his own sword. Except the rumor was false. Cleopatra was very much alive. She found Antony dying but not yet dead, bleeding in the mausoleum she'd begun building for them both. They say she held him as he died. They say he asked to be buried beside her. Poetic, if not practical. Now alone, Cleopatra had one option left. Herself. Octavian, ever the tactician, wanted her alive, paraded through Rome in chains, displayed like a human trophy. The final spoil of Egypt. But Cleopatra knew humiliation was worse than death. She had watched Roman triumphs. She knew how they ended for conquered queens. So she made preparations. Dressed in royal linen, crowned with diadem, surrounded by treasures, she entered her tomb, a stage, a sanctuary, and a trap. The question is, how did she die? The myth says asp bite a cobra, smuggled in a basket of figs, the goddess returning to the earth by serpent's kiss. It's poetic, neat, just enough bite to become legend. But historians squint. An asp bite is painful, unpredictable, not always fatal. Other theories swirl. A poisoned hairpin, a drug-laced ointment, an assisted suicide arranged by her most loyal servants. Some say Octavian found her too late. Some whisper he let her go. No one agrees. What matters is not how she died, but that it was hers to choose. In a world where men wrote her downfall and gods abandoned their temples, Cleopatra crafted her final moment with precision. Not as seductress, not as queen, not as victim, but as the last pharaoh of Egypt, dying on her own terms. They searched for her body. Octavian wanted Cleopatra displayed even in death. But when he reached her tomb, it was sealed, guards neutralized, a note left behind, and inside, Cleopatra lay lifeless, dressed as a goddess, beside Antony's corpse. Rome had its victory, but not its spectacle. Octavian allowed them a burial, perhaps to save face, perhaps to make history neater. He claimed it was mercy, or politics. He knew the people of Egypt still whispered prayers to Isis. And now Isis was dead. Their tomb was sealed. Then it vanished. For over 2 millennia, no trace of it has surfaced. Archaeologists chase shadows under lake beds, beneath crumbling temples, in dreams. Some believe it was destroyed by time. Others say it's hidden beneath modern Alexandria, buried under concrete and myth. Some still believe it will be found. But perhaps Cleopatra planned it that way. After all, how better to escape the grip of Rome than to erase your grave? Even her son, Caesarion proclaimed, King of Kings, was captured and killed. Octavian made sure the bloodline ended with a whisper. Her children by Antony were paraded through Rome in chains. Raised by Octavia, Antony's Roman wife, a final twist of the imperial knife. And yet, Cleopatra survived, not in body, but in symbol. Statues crumbled, scrolls burned, but her myth metastasized. She became Shakespeare's tragic heroine, Hollywood's coal-eyed seductress, a feminist icon, a cautionary tale, a political chess piece carved again and again into whatever shape the era needed. Cleopatra is used, reused, misused, a queen stretched thin over centuries of interpretation. Was she brilliant, manipulative, beautiful, ruthless, all of the above? None? History won't decide. It isn't written by queens. It's written by the men who buried them. And Cleopatra, clever to the last, ensured her final act was not a corpse, but a question mark. To be the last pharaoh was not to rule, but to hold the door as it closed. Cleopatra wasn't just Egypt's queen. She was its epilogue, the final heartbeat of a civilization that had once built pyramids and named stars. Her reign wasn't marked by expansion, but by erosion of borders, of allies, of sovereignty. She was born into a world already fading, where Egypt answered to Roman bribes and loyalty came at the cost of grain. She didn't inherit an empire. She inherited a sandcastle holding back a tide. And yet, she fought. She learned the language her ancestors ignored. She made herself a symbol. She studied statecraft, weaponized femininity, mastered diplomacy, and bent emperors to her will. Her body became battlefield and banner. Her throne, a tightrope stretched between crumbling dynasties and Roman steel. Cleopatra didn't lose because she was weak. She lost because history was already written in Latin. To be the last pharaoh was to wear a crown that no longer protected you, to sit on a throne whose legs were splintering, to know your gods would be forgotten, your children hunted, your tomb unmarked, and to smile anyway. Cleopatra didn't vanish because she failed. She vanished because Rome needed her gone. But absence too is a kind of power. They erased her voice, so we remember her perfume. They buried her body, so we resurrect her myth. They mocked her choices, so we study her mind. She is the only Egyptian pharaoh who still appears in school books across the world, even if painted in foreign colors. The last queen, the final page, the woman who refused to kneel. To be the last pharaoh was to die, knowing you would not be mourned properly, and to trust defiantly that someday you would be remembered anyway. Her crown turned to dust, her tomb lost to time, her empire renamed, rewritten, repaved in Roman stone. But Cleopatra never really left. You'll find her in every whispered debate about beauty and power, in every film that paints her eyes with coal and her lips with venom. You'll find her in the silence of museum plaques that mention Caesar, then Antony, and finally, her, as if she were a footnote to the lives of men she outlived in legacy. And still, she resists. Not through relics, but through reinvention. Each generation reshapes her. Villain, victim, genius, lover, queen. None of them are complete. All of them are true. She became a riddle. Not a resolution. A symbol of everything history couldn't quite bury. Maybe that's the real story. Not the asp, not the ships, not the stolen throne, but the woman who stood at the end of an age and refused to disappear quietly. Cleopatra ruled a dying world with her back straight, her words sharp, and her exits planned. She stitched together pageantry and policy, myth and muscle, and dared to believe Egypt could outlive conquest. It didn't. She did. So next time someone tells you that history is written by the victors, remind them of this. Sometimes, the victors forget their own names, but we still remember hers. Cleopatra, last of her line, first of her kind. Never just a queen, always the question.